with the donors, we never record because it's somewhat of a private conversation on purpose. So I never use the record function. They have the opposite of our challenge.
Yeah.
They like to be able to be as brutally honest as possible without worrying about the filter, where we are filter first. So
Yeah. Well, and the challenge, well, it's not really a challenge. It's just the state Open Meetings Act requires that when you have a virtual meeting,
right,
that you make the recording available to the public, which is why we have to
right, right,
record. And although this probably technically wouldn't be considered to me because we're not going to be doing business, there's no actionable items. Just out of an abundance of caution, we record every committee meeting that we have just in case. So Kim, I don't see anything from Terry. So I mean, my recommendation would be to just go ahead and jump in um,
okay.
and get started.
Yeah, we can catch her up
Yeah.
if necessary when she joins us, but I don't think we're going to be moving at the speed of light, so I think she can probably catch up just fine. Thank you all for making time for our chat today. I don't think we're going to need the whole hour unless somebody wants to really go pretty deep into the nature of the discussion. And I've spent some time looking at the different documents that we have to work with. So, Jim, I'm really glad you're here because I think there's a couple of clarification questions that might be helpful just to ensure we're all using the same words the same way and the same products for the same purposes. Would you all start with just reminding me who chairs what, just so that I remember what our buckets look like? Eileen, I'll let you go first.
I am chairing the grants committee. Fairly new at sharing grants.
Okay.
And then I chair the Foundation of Service.
Okay.
I have got, oh, sorry, you go ahead.
I'm the new chair of Board Development.
And then I have got the Frankenstein committee that is strategic partnerships and communications.
I do feel like that might be accurate because I don't know that all those pieces make a man when they're done, but we'll maybe a little electricity will get the job done. Okay, so that's sort of how our buckets are lined up. So when we had the commission meeting, the thing that I saw that I thought we might be able to be helpful with if we brainstormed as a group, and this is also Destiny's area of expertise, so please hop in and help me out while we're talking. You can have two hats on today. Just thinking through how to make the most of our requirement to have a service plan. We have to have one anyway, so let's make something that's robust and that serves our purposes. And then how do we do that in a way that is reflective of the types of input that we received, that's reflective of the needs in the state, and also creates some kind of a trajectory, which is why, Jim, I appreciate you giving us the updates on the metrics. It's always good to know what current reality looks like when we think about the things to which we aspire, as opposed to, hey, let's do 1,000 of those. Well, we did 3,000 of those last year, so is that what you meant? Right? Or let's do 1,000 of those. We did 10 of those last year. I don't think we can do that. So making sure that we're thoughtful about what our capacities really look like. And then the thing that I had a question about, which we can talk about as we get into sort of the concept of it, is how does our action plan, our annual action plan, come out of the service plan, right? Like, where is the connection between the two of those, and how does that next step get populated as we do the strategic plan or service plan? I think of a strategic plan. So two things that I wanted to start with, and then we'll take a look at what feedback we received. There's two things I've learned to say to any client group that I'm working with who is doing strategic thinking. And I think that potentially both of them apply here. One is the difference between a strategic plan and an operating plan. So an operating plan is generally how we maximize how to most efficiently and effectively do the things we've decided to do. Some of that's going to show up in our strategic plan as well, but it's how we decide that we can most effectively do the things that we've decided to do. It is based on the assumption that we've already determined from our strategic plan what the right things are for us to do. Right? So I realize that sounds pretty obvious when I say it that way, but I have worked with so many organizations that have planned what they're going to do next with the things that they do without asking themselves first whether the activities in which they engage are the ones that lead to the outcomes that they say they desire. So it is entirely possible to do the wrong things really well and give yourself a pat on the back for doing things well that weren't what you needed to be doing, you're spending your time on. So I want us to be very aware of that. There's two components to that. Do we do what we do well? And are they the things that most align with what we desire to accomplish? And then the second thing is, I think, related very much to some of the feedback that we got from people, at least from what I perceive of it. Something can be important and not be ours. And I think that's an important thing to be mindful of. When we ask someone, what are the biggest concerns in our community? What are the most important things that we see happening right now that need attention, response, support, whatever those are? Your answers to that can be absolutely accurate and true, and they're not ours. So that's the other thing I would encourage us to think about. And when I say ours, I mean areas in which our effort, expertise, resources, wealth, and wisdom will create improved outcomes in that area. So you can really care about something and it not be the business of this commission. And both of those things can be true at the same time. So I just want to throw sort of those two sort of lessons learned along the way out there. And you know, I can give you some great examples of those. I don't think you need them. We're all good grown-up people. But I was thinking about like where some of the nuance of that is that we get stuck in that slippery slope. And I was thinking about, you know, doing something like an after-school mentoring program, right? And I used to do some work with one of those. Fantastic program. They decided that they were going to provide snacks and food for the kids that showed up. And, you know, big discussion about that. Well, we're not a food provider. We do mentoring. Well, we know that when you're hungry, you don't think really well. Right? So that probably wasn't out of scope. Wasn't literally what we do, but it's a necessary requirement in order to be able to accomplish the things that we want to get done. And they found that, hey, they also found that they attracted more kids because, you know, a seventh grader will show up for snacks and then stay because they have to, right? Snacks good enough. So that was a great idea. But many of the same kids they supported were also struggled with housing insecurity. That was not theirs. They did not have the skills, the resources, or the capacity to get into the housing for the same group of kids. Does being securely housed improve your academic outcomes? Absolutely it does. That was beyond the scope of what they could do. And so they had to be really thoughtful about, even though this is something that this constituency might need, we might not have the resources to provide it, and we might best partner with someone else to be the ones that provide that piece. So that's just kind of some general wisdom to share for whatever that's worth. Does that make sense to anybody? Yeah, okay. So feel free to use that language as we're talking, right? That's important, but I'm not sure that's ours, or is that the highest and best value of our finite resource? And that's the thing, you know, what I see, I think I'm into my second year, Jim, and hanging around this new block, and I think that one of the things that I've learned to be much more attuned to is just how finite our resources are, whether it's the time, talent, the treasure, the money, the whatever those things are. And having never worked with a state commission before that, understanding where those boundaries are has been an important learning for me. And I think that's what some of the things are to think about when we talk about our theory of change. It's not that we couldn't do that. It's that if we have to choose 3 things, does that make it to the top 3? Or if we had to choose 5, does it make it to the top 5? So that we are strategically doing the things we choose really well, rather than trying to do a whole bunch of things. So anyway, that's just kind of my precursor. I want to start with some of the feedback and any thoughts that you all have on the big buckets that were identified as the needs and the problems. And then we'll talk about the theory of change. So let me share my screen here. All right. And I'm hoping that you can see that. Is it teeny tiny? Can you see it?
It's
I'm
tiny.
leaning
It's a little
in.
small.
Are you leaning in? All right. Well, let's change the view so that we can make this a little bit bigger here. How about that?
That's better.
Better? All right. Well, we'll start here and then we'll just scroll our way through. I've got one of those big monitors for people who have trouble with their monitors, so I can never tell. So Jim, what is the actual question that was the prompt for people on getting the service plan input?
That's a good question. So the question, let's see if I can do it by memory.
You can paraphrase.
Yeah. So the starting, so there were some series of questions. One was, what do you see as the most pressing challenges in Tennessee? The follow-up was, out of that list, what should Volunteer Tennessee address in its next 3-year plan? And what you have on the screen is a result of that second filter question. Start out with a big universe of what are all the kind of pressing challenges, and then what can Volunteer Tennessee utilize volunteerism and service to have some sort of impact on one or more
Right.
of those issues. So that's what this is.
Right. Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Because I even looking back at the last plan, I guess I was a little bit surprised at where some of the focus areas were. So I thought it might be helpful to kind of talk through those. And anybody who wants to chime in on that. So the green is from Jim's how it's kind of the categories, and then there was some more specifics within those. But education, support, and youth mentorship was one of the big categories. Food security, which I have to say is the one that kind of confuses me a little bit. I'm not really sure about that one. I need some help understanding how we're a player in food security. Disaster preparedness and recovery, again, that was in the last plan. I think that's something that's been a big topic of discussion over the past year, and so that might be one that we think about elevating. And then a variety of ways of talking about how to collaborate to expand volunteer opportunities. The Office of Faith-Based Initiatives, statewide efforts, recruiting. We talked about the corporate group being activated that now lives in Nathan's piece of the world. Economic opportunity and workforce development is the final of the big buckets that had a lot of nuances and a lot of different pieces tied to it, whether it was around affordable housing, equity, economics, preparedness for the workplace, all of those pieces. And then some one-offs that showed up that didn't necessarily fit under a bucket. Mental health was mentioned several times. Seniors, veterans, conservation work, community cleanup work, social connectedness, opportunities for rural communities. So those are the big buckets that showed up based on the feedback. And I wonder if anybody has any thoughts on on how those fit into the work that you're doing, particularly maybe in terms of like the partnership building and the foundations. Those the two. I think, Ellen, you got some pretty clear guidelines in terms of the grants, but I also am not involved with the grant, so that might relate in terms of how those are prioritized as well. But what do we think about these buckets?
Yeah, if I can make a comment.
Please.
Yeah, so last year, after we reviewed the grant applications for the year, I did a quick check of all the applications and noted the funding priorities and performance measures. And so what I found was that even though we always seem to have food insecurity at the top of our list, in terms of our AmeriCorps programs and those that apply, there was really only one out of the 18 that had a major focus on food insecurity. We have many, many that have a focus on education and workforce development. So I think perhaps something to think about is food security is, I think it's one of those things where, yes, it's really vital and important, but are we the ones who should have it at the top of our list?
Anybody else have thoughts on that?
I'm not sure for grants because I'm not in that role. I've never actually been on grants board. I've only ever been on Foundation of Service. For Foundation of Service, speaking on our behalf, is that something that we're focusing on? Jim, correct me if I'm wrong. I might be me and Jessica might be the longest members on the committee now. And I just joined a week ago. Wow. Maybe a year and a few months ago. So we have also had that conversation internally of like, one, what is Foundation of Service and what is our focus? With that in mind, I preface that to say we are actually reevaluating this, and we do not feel as if a lot of our scope of work, or I'm sorry, what was the more simple term you used a little bit ago when you first started? That's not in our lane. That's
bucket? I call everything a bucket.
Okay, yeah, that's not in our bucket to address, though it is an important issue. So we are open in the Foundation of Service as we create this new plan to be very intentional about what is Foundation of Service, and then let's align that. But if we look at this, food security would not fall in our bucket. Disaster preparedness and recovery, it could fall in our bucket depending on if we were providing that service to whoever our demographics were looking to serve through our Foundation of Service work. I need to zoom out. The collaborating to expand volunteer opportunities definitely falls under us. I think that falls under everybody. Economic opportunity and workforce development. Again, that's not really our level of expertise unless we're providing a programming for the demographics we're serving, such as at the conference.
Right. So I realize this is a naive question, but how are you thinking about that definition of Foundation of Service? How would you explain that to somebody like me who says, I'm not sure I know what that means? Like, what does your best day look like if that group is successful? What has it done?
Yeah, so the current definition, and I actually do not have the historical knowledge of how this was created, simplified as it's a focus on youth and getting them involved in service. However, when you look at what Foundation of Service actually is, it hits a couple things of like characteristics. So like selflessness, community focus, a common good, developing personal growth. You need to be organized, and having some motivation to do something. So when I think of foundational service, it's characteristics, developing characteristics of individuals to want to be a part of service. That is the Foundation of Service. And so I'm assuming, and we know what that does when you assume though, is how we got focused on youth in Foundation of Service because they were the next generation. However, our committee is having a conversation on, do we keep our focus on youth or do we broaden it out as we're having a larger aging population who are retiring, who also want to volunteer, who want to get involved? We have a youth who are
Mhm.
overachievers who are facing a lot of mental health epidemics who probably need a break.
Mhm.
And just because
Mhm.
they're good leaders
Mhm.
doesn't mean they need to be leaders at this time in their lives. So we have been
Right,
having
right,
those
right.
tough conversations.
Rural versus urban questions. Are those on
The
your
rural
radar as
versus
well?
urban conversations, I assume, again, these fall in line because this is a governor's appointed board, and that is one of his top 5 priorities is the rural communities.
Mhm.
And so if we are working on his behalf, we also make his
Mhm.
priorities our priorities because we represent him.
Right, right. Jim, is that what you think that committee is?
Yeah, well, yes and yes. And I think, I mean, this conversation is one that I had hoped that the commission would have as part of this process because, right now we have 5 committees, but only 4 chairs. So
Right.
that makes me think maybe we need to think about how many committees we have and what the committees do. And it's been a
Right.
long time since the commission has had that discussion. And so I think it's, Kim, you're the expert, so I don't want to sidetrack us into a destruction of how the commission is structured within its committees, but I do think it's important that as the commission is getting ready to enter into its next 3-year plan, that it be structured in a way that's going to support that plan.
Right, right.
Or that the commission figures out how it wants to be structured and then develops a plan that is consistent with that structure. So anyway, that's my thought. So yes, the Foundations of Service originally started out as focusing on youth and how to get youth engaged in volunteerism and service learning. And the commission, when I say we, I mean Volunteer Tennessee generally, used to do a lot more service learning work than we do now because we had service learning funding. That funding went away probably 10 years ago, and we've continued to do service learning, but not programmatically. Like we've got one AmeriCorps program that does some service learning work. We've provided some mini grants for service learning, but not anything major. But I mean, service learning is an important part of kind of that educational piece. So, and because that service learning funding went away about 10 years ago, the Foundations of Service Committee has kind of broadened its scope a little bit more to be more of like, how do we engage people just generally in volunteerism and service as opposed to just young people, which again, I think is fine because that's important, an important discussion, an important thing to do. So, yeah, I don't know what all that means. And just as a caveat, those things that are in green, those are titles that I came up with just based on the content of the feedback. So please don't feel like those have to be the category names. I just looked at the stuff and developed a category name that made sense to me. But if it doesn't make sense to you all, we can absolutely change it.
So, Kim, if I can add my 2 cents, and I'm going to go a much higher level.
Go add $1.50. Go ahead.
I'm going to use the language of direct and indirect impact. And when I think about, so the mission of Volunteer Tennessee is to encourage volunteerism and community service. From my perspective, and this is Nathan talking, that is our direct impact, volunteerism and community service. By extension, our indirect impact is all of the other things, right? Like we are not Second Harvest Food Bank, right? They're the ones addressing food security or food insecurity. But if we're doing a good job of supporting volunteerism and community service broadly, then we are supporting them and being successful in their mission, right? And I'm struggling with like some of these topics in my mind are indirect benefits of the work that we're doing. When I think about our audience, our clients is the wrong word, but our audience, our clients who really are our constituents.
Yeah.
It's volunteers themselves and the organizations they're serving. like in my mind, that it's not so much the people receiving services from the nonprofits. And I feel like some of these seem like we're maybe creeping into that territory a little bit, right? Like, how do we increase number of volunteers across the state? How do we increase volunteer capacity and support across the state? How do we uplift volunteer and nonprofit success stories across? Like, that seems in my mind to be our meat and potatoes. If we're doing that well, then all the nonprofits, all the ships across the state rise with that. And that's where I have struggled with, I think, over the last year with some of the committee priorities has been they don't seem to be focused on volunteerism and community service. They seem to be almost a little too in the weeds of the specific social issue. So that's kind of my high level. I feel like our meat and potatoes is volunteerism and community service. And all of our efforts should be focused on increasing that statewide, therefore helping with food security, helping with financial literacy, but indirectly.
Building off of that, then, have we had insight into what organizations are currently facing? Like, obviously, volunteer capacity, right? And so when I think from foundation of service standpoint, we would assist with the volunteer capacity of providing opportunities to service learning, training for individuals. But what other areas? Obviously, funding will always be a nonprofit organization problem.
I would. So my day job, of course, is nonprofit support, specifically in the Northeast Tennessee region. I think there's probably some professional development and capacity building from that lens, not just volunteerism. But I know the language that I've heard in our area is we don't have the equivalent in Northeast Tennessee of an Alliance for Better Nonprofits or an entity like that. So I think about where does Andrea work? What's it called?
Tennessee Nonprofit Network.
Yeah,
TNN, Tennessee Nonprofit Network. Yeah.
So not so much that we're necessarily providing that service, because I feel like that service exists and it's called the Tennessee Nonprofit Network, but ensuring and supporting, I think, some of those nonprofits and agencies and ensuring that they're aware of and have access to those things, right? Like the number of organizations in our community that on a day-to-day basis, I'm like, did you know there is a statewide organization that's trying to offer support for they don't even know it exists, right? So when I think about like a partnership, as chair of strategic partnerships, like that in my mind would be such a valuable partnership as how are we uplifting the resources that exist at the state level that could benefit those nonprofit partners. Doesn't mean we're necessarily doing the professional development, but it exists and they just don't know about it. So I definitely think there's a component of that as well, of how are we supporting them? Because at the end of the day, we can say we want to increase volunteers all day and increase volunteerism. That can only rise and increase if our organizations have the capacity and the support to be able to host and to do that. And I don't think that they necessarily do. And that is my Northeast Tennessee 8-county perspective. So,
no, I think that's helpful. I mean, Nashville also has we're one of the secondary hubs for TNN, and we also have local service options as well, and we have a very robust hands-on network. So we have some of those other resources as well, but I think your point is well made, and you actually said in a much smarter way what's been living in my head, which is what's a primary outcome and what's a secondary outcome, and which ones can and should we own. And it feels to me like that makes a lot of sense, and I wonder what the rest of you guys think about that language. Our goal is to encourage and support volunteerism and community service, with the understanding that being done well in our state helps our partners to do these other things, versus us attempting to own those other things. How do you feel about that?
It makes sense to me, and I think it's the most strategic thought is because issues may change. right? But we won't need
Right.
to keep having this conversation as priorities continue to shift because our
Mhm.
focus has always been volunteerism and not the specific area. And
Well, and I think, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think about it too when I've looked at the outcomes and some of the stuff that Jim provided. You know, you start getting into a slippery slope there when you try to own other people's outcomes.
And Kim, can I throw in another high level thing, which is,
Yeah, please.
yeah, well, right now the commission's mission is to encourage volunteerism and community service, but that also hasn't been reviewed
Hmm.
in probably almost 25 years. I think the commission went through a process not long after I was hired back 25 years ago to kind of revise its mission and uh,
Hmm.
what's the other thing that goes? It's not the mission statement. The other thing. Anyway,
Vision.
vision. Yeah, the vision statement and mission statement. The commission revised that either the year I was hired or shortly thereafter, and it hasn't been reviewed again. So that's another thing is that still the right mission for Volunteer Tennessee? Um, and the vision is long. I can get that to you if you want, but I don't.
No,
It's
I'm good. If it's long enough that you can't remember it, it's a bad vision statement.
it's probably about 3 or 4 sentences. So I can't remember.
No, sir.
Yeah.
No, sir. Ta-da. Our vision is to celebrate and be the leaders. So what a vision is, I'm being a little facetious. Obviously, you're not going to use those words, but that's kind of what a vision statement should be. That for those of you that don't live in our world of geek language, the intention of a vision statement is if we were wildly successful and the world looked the way that we think it should, that's what your vision is. So to be the state in the country best known for leadership and volunteerism, that's a vision statement.
That's actually
Your
not too
mission
far.
statement.
Sorry to interrupt. That's actually not too far from what it says. It's just longer than that.
Yeah. And then your mission statement is, what do we aspire to accomplish as an organization that we believe leads us into that visionary future, right? And then you build from it. The thing I would recommend about the mission statement is, I was actually just talking to a client this morning, and I do it backwards from most people that do planning consulting. I don't like to start with wordsmithing mission statements because I think we get really bogged down in those. You get really attached to words. The state of Tennessee is a national leader. Okay. See, could you just stop where my dots are? Because my dots just stop after community service. And that's a beautiful vision statement. Just throw out the rest. But what I like to do with a mission statement is actually see what is important to us. What are our goals? Right? What are the things that we're committing ourselves to? And then review the mission statement to see if it aligns with who we think we are. I kind of like to do them backwards. And I find that mission statements tend to write themselves if you do it that way. So maybe we can put a pin in that. We can park the mission statement question for after we're done. And I do think it's interesting that you raise a question about whether these committees are the right committees. Other than Nathan, who there's just, I think mathematically he's just screwed. Some of y'all might put yourselves out of a job. You might decide that a different alignment might make more sense in terms of how we do the committee work. So I think if you all approach it with your committees as, this is what lives in our bucket right now, like how does that fit in the context of things? So like, Eileen, I could think, and this is just completely rhetorical, I'm not saying I believe this, but you all might decide that the grant process is a tool, not a goal. And so the goal might be, how do we provide the financial resources and partnerships to help partners in volunteerism be successful? And the grant process is one of those things. And you all want to approach that philosophy a little differently. I could see you saying, well, proactively, the commission's decided these are the three big areas that we want to support: economic development and education. And we're going to approach how we lean into our RFPs to reflect that. So it may be that it's not quite as linear as it is right now. And I don't know enough about grants. Like I said, that was just a rhetorical. And obviously, Nathan, your piece of the world wants some clarification, because those two things are not like the other, the Sesame Street girl says.
Yeah. Well,
And I wonder too, in terms of like board development, is board development one of the features of a strong infrastructure? Is that a part of a larger operational goal? Is that board development and strategic leadership, but it includes strategic planning? I don't know. Eileen, go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah. I've been thinking about the role of the grants committee. The grants committee is focused almost primarily on the AmeriCorps programs. And there are, I believe it's 3 people on staff out of 7 who are focused primarily on the AmeriCorps programs. And there is no, and the reason why we're an America's Service Commission is because of AmeriCorps, and that's where so much of the funding comes from. But we don't see anything in our vision or our mission statement about that work. And I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just stating it as an observation. But there is a lot of internal resource that's dedicated to supporting the AmeriCorps programs.
So Destiny's asking the question, Jim, are we able to have task forces or work groups? Yeah, are our committees reflected in our bylaws? Are we discussing a bylaws change if we're talking about changing committees, or are the committees at the pleasure of the commission?
No, the standing committees are outlined in the bylaws currently. The 5, yeah. But I mean, certainly the chair has the authority to call ad hoc committees. We could do task forces, work groups. We could certainly do all of that.
Anything that's not a standing committee. Yeah.
Right.
And all of those, Jim, just for clarification, all of those require the same public notices, even if there's informal. Where does it depend?
2 or more people, huh?
2 or more. Well, so that's kind of the safe interpretation that we've been given by the Finance Administration legal team, that we should do public notice for committee meetings, even for committee meetings where there's not any actionable item, which I think like for this meeting, I think it's better to be safe than sorry, because we don't want people to accuse the commission of trying to do things in secret. So yes, I think unfortunately, even if it's a task group or a work group or whatever, if it's going to involve 2 or more commission members, we're going to have to probably do public notice for that, which is not a big deal. It means we have to think a little bit further out. We have to survey people earlier in terms of when they're available, and we have so it just a longer lead time.
Right. Yeah.
And just for clarification, why I was asking about work groups and task forces, because if Elaine is what you're saying, about grants, is your focus is AmeriCorps. We don't have AmeriCorps listed, but we know AmeriCorps is the key function of this. maybe we don't have a grants committee because your focus is AmeriCorps, but we have a grants work group. So we know that like you all come together at this time frame and this timeline, and that's your focus. So then you all can use your skills in other committee areas or other needs of areas within the commission instead of just
Mhm.
meeting to meet where you know that you can like, okay, we can be of value somewhere else. And we just know month January through March, we sit down and look at all the grants. And I'm not simplifying your actions and your steps. Again, I don't know the internal operations of your committee. But if it's no longer a committee, you could still be a work group or a task force.
I don't,
So
I
you're
don't have
saying,
an answer. I don't know.
so Destiny, you're saying in that example, that would be like they would meet as needed when there's grants to review, but there's no need. They don't necessarily have to have their own strategic priority. Their purpose
Yes,
is
yeah.
success
So
gets
it'll,
got it,
yes,
got it.
exactly. So like Elaine said, well, why, if our focus is AmeriCorps, why do we need to do, this is me summing up, like, why would they need to do all that if their focus is AmeriCorps? Like, instead of doing that and have a strategic plan or service plan, you would just be a work group and your focus would be AmeriCorps, and that's what you are.
Yeah, I'm
Mhm.
not, I wasn't saying why do we need to do all this other stuff because we're AmeriCorps. I was rather saying why aren't we raising AmeriCorps to a higher level and
Elevating it. Yeah. Yeah. And it does seem strange, at least as somebody who's still a relative outsider, that that AmeriCorps doesn't show up more
Not at all.
visibly, right, in leadership. I would have expected for it to have been a pretty high visibility component. So maybe grants is where it lives now. I bet it started out living on its own, but yeah, no, I think y'all are thinking absolutely the right direction, and I would encourage that the chairs have a discussion after you've met with your committees, so that there's some kind of a transition before the commission talks about recommendations, because I think it sounds to me like it's possibly heading towards a different committee, a different recommendation for a committee structure. And if it hasn't been updated in more than 10 years, I'm not the tiniest bit surprised that it's feeling like it's a little bit out of alignment. That makes sense to me. Our core areas of work.
So I just heard that we need to include AmeriCorps more. Is there any other area that we need to include more that's in our bucket? And I ask you all because you all have, three of you on here have the historical knowledge.
Well, I guess the question would be back to the group and maybe to Kim, is like, how much do we focus on tools as opposed to goals? I don't
Right.
know, I don't really know the answer to that. So the AmeriCorps program is the largest. I mean, that's the reason the commission was created in the first place, was to make the state eligible for AmeriCorps. It's the largest
Mhm.
grant program. We have around $9 million that goes through the commission each year, and 8 million of that is for AmeriCorps. So it's a huge part of what we do. But thinking about in terms, like, it's a tool,
Mhm.
right? It's a tool to do something.
Right.
It's not a goal in and of itself. I mean, personally, I would like to see the need for AmeriCorps go away, because we're taking such good care of our citizens that we don't need it anymore.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
realistically, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But I think we should all be looking to work ourselves out of a job, in at least in kind of what the field that we're doing. I think the funeral home directors are always going to have a job, right? We don't have to worry about being perpetually doing something. In my opinion, let's try and stop doing stuff. But anyway, that's kind of a question back to the
Mhm.
group, is like, how much do we focus on the tools, which we certainly have not focused enough on AmeriCorps in the past.
So for me, I would like to know what those tools are and things like that. Like give us a list. Like if someone could give me a list of what it is, and then I think we would have the knowledge to then say, okay, based on our mission, we need to have these many tools or this many this. But right now, I truly don't know what all our tools are. Like, yeah, we know AmeriCorps, but what else do we have that we should be focusing on for us to then identify what's in scope, what's out of scope?
If I can add, I agree, Destiny. I think for me, and this is purely Nathan talking, I'm going to use this phrase signature programs because that's the phrase that we use in higher education when we talk about really important things. It's not all the things, but it's the really important ones. I think AmeriCorps is on that list. It's definitely a signature program. And I definitely, and up to this point has been. In my perspective, I also think that I think the Tennessee Serves Network has the potential to be a signature program. I feel as though this CSP work seems to have a lot of momentum. And if we get all of our ducks in a row, I think has the potential to be a signature program. And I think the conference, whatever it's called, because I know there's, whether it looks the same or whatever, but something around this, the gathering, the convening of, the support of in a physical space. Like in my mind, those key areas are all like there's a professional development bucket, there's a volunteer recruitment bucket, there's a AmeriCorps, which is like physically staffing some of these organizations, right? So it's like all the lenses of the same topic. I don't think we talk about all of them as signature programs. I think they definitely have some potential. The other thing that I'll add, I'll put on my political hat for a minute, and this may echo, Jim didn't say this, but I'm in agreement with him for a different reason, is I'll just be blunt, in our current political climate, hanging all of our caps on the AmeriCorps hanger is probably unwise. Right? Like we need to probably diversify.
Did you just hang cats on an anchor?
No,
that is the worst mixed metaphor I've ever heard.
No,
what
not
heck?
An anchor, a hanger.
You're still putting a cat on a hanger. What are you?
A cat, I swear, Kim, no, but you get what I'm saying. The need to diversify.
I do.
Yeah, the need to.
Right.
To Jim's point, it's like right now it is the predominant portion of our budget. To some and in a lot of ways, it's the predominant portion of staff time. And I know there's a lot of work from Jim and his team that go into AmeriCorps, and that work's going to continue. But should something happen, I don't want it to. Should something happen, I am concerned that we've put all the eggs in that basket, which I think could be challenging and probably unwise with everything we know that's happening around us. So as much as we can continue to support and uplift AmeriCorps, and I think we can definitely strengthen our AmeriCorps uplift. One of the things that, in terms of stories, the number of people that I'm still amazed have never heard of AmeriCorps, even though they themselves may have met an AmeriCorps worker, blows my mind. But I know that's an uphill battle. But on top of that, I think figuring out how we uplift and support some of these other really awesome programs that we have that I know we haven't really been able to give as much time and attention and love to, and resources for that matter, because we don't get all the funding. So I know which is a challenge.
That makes sense. So I'm trying to just type some of what I think I hear you saying as potentially some of the direction that this might go. And then board and resource development, the people and processes. So even those really aren't that far removed from what the current committees are, right? But it reframes that conversation a little bit in terms of like what lives where and why. That's just a suggestion. Obviously that's not where we're going to land, but I love the idea that if we took those as the strategic planning goals. So our goal is that, and Nathan, to paraphrase you, this is what we do, right? These other things are the why we do them. I think our strategic plan, if we look at our theory of change, our strategic plan is our what. and our what is fueled by the desire to have these types of impacts. So it would make a lot more sense to me if the strategic plan was kind of flipped on its side, so that it would also create a little bit less confusion with the overlap that we currently have between who owns which goal, and how does that balance happen? Oh, I thought you did that. You thought I did that. So I really like that. I like that direction that you all are thinking. So theory of change, because now I lied. Now it's our whole hour. Sorry, guys. But theory of change, because you guys are just so full of incredible stuff. If we back that up into that theory of change language, let me pull up that other screen. So has everybody done a theory of change exercise of some kind in the past? Give me a thumb if yes, I've done a theory of change before. Okay, so 2 ups, two, I don't know. Eileen, I know you have, you just probably haven't called it that. So we do have the worksheets, and Jim shared those out, and some of these are specific to the nature of the work that we do as in the example. So I thought those were incredibly helpful. But the thing that I would encourage you to think of is kind of the language that's what I was playing with on that other screen. The idea of a theory of change is a couple of things. One is that we believe that change is not only possible, but it's desirable. That we are hopeful for a future that is better, different, improved, something. And we believe that we have the ability to create the change necessary to achieve that. So that's why it's a theory of change. But if you were to say a theory of change in a single sentence, it would be, we have these resources that we believe if we use them in these ways, create these results, and these results change this. So if I was to say a theory of change, the whole big fancy chart as one sentence, we believe that a robust network of skilled and dedicated volunteers across the state of Tennessee can partner with schools and organizations to make them more successful, because that improves the lives of people in communities across our state. That's our theory of change. And it doesn't really need to be much more complex than that. The way that you would use this at the committee level is, what are the and this the thing that I would add to this particular model is, again, remember I said that something can be important but not ours. The place where I think people hit the wall with that the most is they think about the needs of the people that they serve. They don't start with what their resources are. And our resources are very specific. We have dollars, expertise, connections, and the ability to activate volunteers. You know, we're not building houses. We're not, there's a lot of things that we are not. So that may be a community problem, but it's not our community problem to solve. So what are our resources? The question I would ask each of the committees would be, 2 questions. What resources do we have that fall under our purview? And then with those resources, what would be the highest and best use of those? What is the highest and best use of these resources to fulfill the goals of Volunteer Tennessee? And if you start the conversation with those, I think that you're going to have a really robust discussion. And you can start it in any place that you want to in terms of using this as a tool if you've not used it before. You can start with the what do we have and talk about what to do with them and then how it helps. You could say, here's how we like to help. What would it look like if we did that, right? You can start with any of the 3 columns. You just have to be able to fill out all 3 of them. If you say we'd love to change the number of premature deaths in the state of Tennessee, I'd say, okay, what activities are we going to engage in to do that? Yeah, we can't do that. Okay, well then that's not our activity, right? That one doesn't belong to us. So that's how I would use this as a goal, if that makes sense. But I keep coming back to, and then let me show you real quick. Here's the service plan that we started with as our point of discussion. And I think you all just completely turned this upside down, which just makes me so happy I can't stand it. Because I think our strategic goal never was to increase food security, right? Our strategic goal was to be a provider of a robust set of resources to allow food security providers to increase food security. So I think you guys just absolutely hit the nail. Jim, you've got 1 minute left. Did we accomplish what you wanted to accomplish with this chat? I feel like that flip just changes the game.
Yeah, well, I guess that I would put that back to the committee chairs, whether or not they feel like they now can go back to their committees and have some additional meetings to continue the discussion. Because really, we need the committees. We need to do some additional committee work.
Right.
If we try and do this with the entire commission, it's gonna grind to so
that many people can't decide anything.
Yeah. So that I think that I just put it back to the committee chairs. Do you feel like you can now go back to the committees and have some additional meetings to discuss it?
Yeah, I'll say that this is helpful because I think we were able to put some worms back in the can. Right. So I think being able to now go
I love you so much.
being able to go back to the committee, and I feel like there's now some guardrails, right? Of, hey, these are all things that matter. We know these are needs in the community. But here's our wheelhouse, here's our area, here are our guardrails. Let's stay within them. Doesn't mean we're not impacting that thing, but the way in which we impact it really needs to be in this lane, right? Through these mechanisms. I think that is helpful. I think that'll make for a more meaningful conversation because it's not an absolute free for all, right? There's some sort of a guiding principle, some guardrails. So I think this has been very helpful.
And you may or may not be able to tick off all 4 or 5 of these areas. I just added the physical, mental, and behavioral health because it felt to me like that was kind of a combination of some of the ones that didn't land someplace else. And I think, just personally speaking, I'd make a vote for mental health being considered in our current times.
One thing that
I think if you could create a grid of those, you'd be winning.
The other last thing I'll add is what I've also found helpful about this conversation is in terms of like my day job, I've never been a fan of this one project or initiative is owned by one person or it's owned by one team per se, right? So when I think about pick any of those signature programs we just talked about that we want to uplift and do better about uplifting, right? It's like that one program can be touched in different ways by all the committees, right? But it's figuring out how, like what part of that, right? It's not like this one thing can only be owned by strategic partnerships, right? It may be that the strategic partnerships committee or communications is probably a better example, right? Communications in theory should be communicating and uplifting everything, whether they own it or not, right? Like they should be supporting all of the initiatives, even if it's not their project, right? So trying to think through when I think about AmeriCorps, when I think about the Service Network, when I think about the conference, yes, they may have a home, but that doesn't mean that other committees, based off the necessity of that committee, can't support and uplift if it makes sense for that committee. So that has been very helpful as well, because I feel like there's been some hesitation for committees to work outside of their lane. And it's like, well, everything's your lane, right? If communications is everything.
Right.
Like it's literally everything. Strategic partnerships, there may be partnerships that support everything, right? So, and not to shy away from those. So.
I think
all right. Well, I will.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Fine.
So I have a bit of a concern about going straight back to our committees, because if we do that, it almost seems like we would come up with 5 different strategic plans, and then we'd have to merge those plans. I wonder if not a different approach might be to have one or two members of each committee. So let's say the committee chair plus one person to meet like we met today and try and come up with something combined. And because I'm just afraid if we go straight to committees, we'll end up with 5 different things that we have to merge. And the other point I wanted to make is that when Volunteer Tennessee goes out for a roadshow or for public hearings, the input that we're going to get is the why stuff in what you wrote up. You know, those people who are giving us input from the outside are going to tell us what they need in their communities.
That's a great point. I think part of our responsibility has to be, to Nathan's point, of where are the boundaries. The question isn't what do you need in your community as much as it's more specifically, how can the activation and the role of volunteers support the things that are needed in your community? You know, hold people accountable to the fact that we all know that there are people who need safe places to sleep and need food in their bellies. Specifically, how do we fit into that question, right? So I think if we come up with smarter questions, that helps.
Yeah.
So maybe this is helpful. This is a Jim question. And I think, Eileen, I hear you. I think your point's well taken. Jim, from your perspective, obviously we need to get this done. Like it needs to happen, right? From a time perspective. What realistically, when it comes to I'm gonna open my question up more. What do you view as next steps in terms of what you need? Right. So obviously the committees need to identify those priorities that will go in the strategic plan. This has been helpful to put up some of those guardrails, but what do you need and when do you need it? I guess is more so my question. Work backwards.
Yeah. So the discussion that we had at the full commission meeting last month, we kind of revised the plan a little bit. And this meeting was part of that. And then going back to committees through some process was another. And the revised kind of plan, or the revised timeline, not plan, the revised timeline includes having some sort of draft, something to discuss at the meeting in May. So what I think that is, though, I'm not sure. One thing that I think the plan needs, the state service plan needs, is like, what are going to be our end outcomes, our goals? What are we hoping to accomplish in this next 3 years? Because you can build out the activities from that. Going back though to Kim's point, is like that those goals and outcomes have to be within the realm of things that Volunteer Tennessee can do. Right. So if you eliminate the things that we can't have any impact on, then what's going to be left is the stuff that we can. And then we can start building out the what are we actually going to do to accomplish that? So I think that would be the ideal to have by May, is some sort of draft set of end outcomes. And by end, I mean like at the end of the 3-year period. And potentially longer, depending on what time frame you all want to look at, so that the commission can say, yes, we agree, these are the things that we should pursue in this next 3 years, and now let's start building out we've got our castle in the sky, let's set about building the foundation underneath it.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah,
I like a good timeline. Know what we got to do.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Jim.
No, well, I was just going to say we can do a variety. Like we could work to come up with a survey. I mean, we could draft up a survey and circulate it amongst this group to do input. We could send that out to everybody and do it by survey. We could do the suggestion of Eileen of having chairs plus one. However you guys want to accomplish that is totally up to you all. I mean, the staff is here to support the direction that the commission wants to go with this.
Well, hearing Eileen's thoughts, I think I'm in agreement, especially if the goal is we have some sort of a draft or something to work off of by May. I think that's a good realistic goal that gives us, what, a month and a half. I think, to Eileen's point, I know for me and for a lot of times when I'm working with teams, when you have a lot of people in one room and you're trying to do what we did today, you don't make it very far because you talk over one another. I'm wondering if, to Eileen's point, if there's value in us coming up, us being the folks on this call, maybe plus some plus ones, coming up with that initial high level draft that folks can then respond to. Because I feel like if you just go straight into a meeting and say, okay, what do we want to prioritize? That whiteboard's too big, right? But being able to go in to say, okay, we have narrowed
That's how we
down.
had that long list.
Yeah. Like, we've narrowed it down to this framework. That gives us the chance to do the guardrails, maybe to even go ahead and tentatively identify those priority areas. And now a committee has something to physically respond to, right? So now the Strategic Partnerships Committee has a framework and they can go, okay, how do I fit into it? They're not having to write it, but they're having to figure out what pieces of it they get to own, right? I like Eileen's idea of maybe a small work group, perhaps, to come up with an initial high level draft that then we take back to the committees for edits and revision. And I like that idea.
Yeah, I do too.
Sounds good to me.
A strategic planning committee. Look at that. Okay. Well, I will, for whatever help it might be to you all, I will save this and email it to Jim so that he can share it with everybody, unless I can find the email for us, and then I'll just share it with you all. Obviously, these are not any answers. This is just me thinking and reflecting as we were talking. But it might help to jog your memory of what were some of the key things that were discussed. And I really like, Eileen, something that you said they're going to ask us about the why. And I really think that that's a great context for looking at the plan as a whole, right? What is the environment in which we're doing it? What is our what and what is our why? Our what are the things we're going to do. Our whys are the things that we aspire to be the outcomes of it. And just keep those in mind as we're working on a planning. We can do our what. We hope to achieve our why. Right? We don't do the whys, we do the whats.
Yeah.
So in terms of next steps then, so I'll ask this, and it's probably a Jim question. So in terms of next steps, so if we're going that route of a strategic planning committee, obviously we need to go ahead and find a time to, sooner rather than later, to pull together that conversation to get into the weeds. Is that just will that just be a scheduling poll like you normally do, Jim, and we just identify who needs to be on that call, or how do we want to navigate that?
Yeah, well, I think we would need the committee chairs to identify who else they want to be in that, because those people are going to need to be part of that poll as well. So I think that's step one, is figure out who else is part of that meeting. Then we can do a poll to figure out when it's going to be. I think those are the two next steps, I think.
And do you have an updated list of committee members?
Yes, what I'll do is I will I just had it open and I closed it, but I will, in follow up to this meeting, I'll email out the committee list that has all the different committees and who is currently on those committees. Now it still has the strategic partnerships and communications as separate committees, but obviously, Nathan, those people are now the Frankenstein. So yeah, I'll send that out so that you all know exactly who's on your committees. And then ask you all to identify someone by maybe next week. And then once we know who all is going to participate, we can set up the next doodle poll and figure out the next time. Kim, sorry to put you on the spot, but are you willing to be part of that discussion as well?
I am happy to be part of that discussion as long as it is not between March 20th and 29th,
Okay.
because I will be in England.
All right.
Well, the starting point then will be, I'll ask you what are good dates for you, and those are the dates I'll use in the poll. So,
Got it.
okay. Great. Okay.
This is-
So that's the 3 steps. Two for the committee chairs and 1 between me and Kim to figure out potential dates for the next meeting.
Perfect.
And I am hitting send right now to share the document with you guys. And I'm sending it back to the email list that Jim had on the reminder. So so you guys will have this in your hot little hands here in just a minute.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect, because I'll
Thank
forget
you.
later. All right, thanks guys.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so
I think
much.
this was pretty helpful.
Yeah, it was
Thanks,
great.
Kim.
Oh,
Thanks,
good.
Jen, for arranging.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
you
all.
put something back in the toothpaste tube and took something out. So yeah, it's all good. Bye.
thank you all.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.